In Canada, at least there's, like we don't have to pay for a visit to the doctor or something like that. We pay just a forsaken amount of personal tax. I mean, where I'm from in British Columbia, the highest personal tax rate is 53.5% combined provincial plus federal. But the thing is that kicks in at around $250,000. So I think in the U.S. you might eventually get up to that, combined tax rate in some states, but it's going to be a way higher income threshold. But then, of course, you guys got to deal with all the extra care costs as in terms of out-of-pocket premiums, and it leads to fantastic channels like this. So.
Steve Willems is a financial advisor friend from Canada who was visiting my hometown as part of a separate function and was kind enough to stop in and say hi to my family and to me. He has a great YouTube channel of his own that helps Canadians with all sorts of financial planning topics, and I floated the idea of him sharing his thoughts on retirement myths up in Canada so our audience could hear what it's like on that side of the border. He was kind enough to agree and discusses the 10 common retirement myths that he encounters on a regular basis. Now, I made a rookie mistake, and the camera on him is slightly out of focus for the first 5 minutes of our conversation. Luckily, the camera locks onto him about 5 minutes into the interview, and he and his handsomeness are crispy clear from that point forward. I hope you enjoy our conversation. All right, we have a new guest here. It is Steve Willems, and I refer to him affectionately as my Canadian friend. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for being here. And you're in town, and so you agreed to come into the den and record a video to help retirees from a little bit more of a Canadian perspective. So thank you for being here. And you have an outline here of the myths from a retirement perspective. How many have we got today to go through?
We got 10 to go through. 10 that we've seen. We were helping folks kind of figure out what their retirement looks like up in Canada. And it turns out that there's a lot of these kind of misconceptions or things that people think their retirement will look like. And then we kind of see the before and after. So what they think is going to happen before they retire, what actually happens after they retire. And I guess seeing a couple hundred of these scenarios, it turns out that probably they're actually universal, and they're the same experience for anyone in the U.S. It would be the same as what happens up in Canada.
And I'm excited to have you go through the Canadian perspective because you're going to use kind of systems and accounts and things from the Canada side. Yeah. So I think a lot of our viewers are in the United States, and so I think it's an opportunity for them to look at Canada and either say that's better or maybe worse than us, and they can do that.
They can make their own decisions.
Yes. Yeah. So let's get into that. Let's talk about the first myth that you would consider is important for retirees to understand.
Okay, so one of the first myths that we often kind of come up to when we're building a financial plan for someone is like, how much am I going to actually spend in retirement? And the average retiree thinks that their spending will actually decline pretty significantly in retirement. And perhaps there might be times when that might be true, right? Like your savings is coming off, maybe your mortgage is paid down. But for the average, successful retiree that we're seeing, their spending actually stays flat from their pre-working, like their working years into their early retirement years. That's been our experience. The data kind of supports it. And so when we're kind of building out financial plans for people, often what we would do is we kind of put their spending in retirement. We'll mirror it as close as we can off of their current spending, right? I always say like the biggest predictor of your spending in retirement is going to be what did your spending look like before you retired, right? Yeah. Like that's going to be our base case. If we can make this thing work where you actually don't have a reduction of your spending in those early years of retirement, that's going to be like the gold standard, right? And the data suggests there's a great study from JP Morgan that looks at how retirement spending changes over time, and the academic data supports this too. It looks like kind of like a smile, right? Mm-hmm. So in your 50s, early 60s, typically your net worth is the highest. You exit the workforce, and your spending, the data suggests, stays the same. We call that like the go-go phase, right? And then maybe that runs from like 65 to 75. 75 to 85 is going to be kind of like your slow-go season. You'll maybe see a 10 or 15% reduction. A lot of those discretionary expenses are going to fall off then. And then kind of into the no-go phase would be like 85 to 95. Up in Canada, in a married couple, you got a 25% chance of one of them living to age 95. And so obviously you're spending at that point, you're not doing the trips anymore. You're not doing any of that discretionary stuff. But at the very end, often you have, in Canada at least, you have a kick of healthcare costs that come in, and they can be pretty significant even up in kind of subsidized healthcare land in Canada. And so the misconception is just that your spending, is gonna look a certain way, and then real life happens. It actually looks very, very different. And it's these reductions of spending that occur over time that most people don't think about. And often when you're looking at their financial plans, they just do like flatline retirement burn.
Yeah.
Maybe you need, $8,000 a month or $9,000, whatever the number is. And you look at the plan and you're kind of trying to see if it's based on evidence or, anything empirical. And it's just like, no, we're just going to have you spend $8,000 a month every single year till you turn 95. And it's just like, that's not real life, right? Like real life has way more ebb and flow to it. And the good news is actually, if you kind of base it on what real life actually looks like, it actually tends to make the plan look even better because it means you need less spending later on. At least that's the Canadian experience.
Yeah. And it's interesting as you talk about this, I think we'll get to tax implications on this, but a lot of people get a little bit concerned around the tax scenario. And our observations are similar in that your tax control actually gets a little easier in retirement if you've planned correctly.
Right.
But to your point, your spending could stay the same.
Yeah.
But then there's a lot of room for tax control in that as well to manage that.
Yep.
So that's awesome. What is myth number 2 for these retirees to understand?
Okay, so like the second myth that we often see is just that, okay, if I have enough money, I won't worry about money anymore. And we work with folks who have a lot. We work with folks who have a little, and it's just completely untrue. If I had to guess, like sometimes in our process, we'll ask someone like, okay, do you think your plan's going to work out like really well? Like, do you think you have enough? Mm-hmm. Right? And often they'll say no. And I would say, okay, well, how much more do you think you need to have, saved or squirreled away or whatever until you feel like you have enough? And almost of every single time I ask that question, the answer always comes back as 2 times what I have right now. Hmm. And so it's fascinating, right? Because
is it just a pessimistic view of the future, or what contributes to that?
It's 2 things. It's people who struggle with actually like knowing if they have enough is they just haven't run their numbers, right? Like they mathematically haven't ever tested it in a rigorous enough way that has them actually know quantifiably if they do in fact have enough. But then the other part is more like the hedonic treadmill, right? So it's like it's the keeping up with the Joneses. It's the goalposts are always moving one step ahead, and they never actually, they get to where they thought they would feel, whatever that number was, maybe $1 million, and then they get there like, oh, this doesn't feel the way that I thought it was going to feel.
Yeah.
And so then they're like, okay, well, maybe if 2 million will make me feel better and more confident. And really what's going on here is like there's this unseated thing somewhere in your soul that isn't being properly addressed in whatever way. And so math can help to make you feel a little bit more confident in this. But as well, there's definitely like a softer side of kind of just looking inward and being aware that you're like, you can hop off this treadmill, that you can actually define what enough is for you. And in terms of like setting your expectations where they need to be as you think about that jump into retirement. So there's the number side, there's like the personal, like the head work that you kind of need to do. And if you commit to doing both of those things, you find that actually can find a lot more confidence and kind of like contentment as you make that jump.
It's interesting because I was listening to a book, and I don't remember the book, but I remember where I was when I heard this, and we were driving in Bend, Oregon, and the comment was, the author was speaking with a very successful person. He's like, how much would you need to retire and feel comfortable? And the individual said $10 million, and then I'm done. And so he checks in with him like 5 years later, and the guy's made $10 million, $20 million, $30 million. He's just incredibly successful. And he says, why haven't you retired? You're like, you've 3x your number. And he's like, I just don't think it's enough. I got to, not until I get to a bigger number. So I think that's kind of this constant moving the goalposts.
Yeah, Morgan Housel, best-selling finance author, he writes a lot about this. And one of the keys is just getting the goalposts to stop moving, right? And it's probably the biggest hack to making a retirement work is if you can figure out how to make the goalposts stop moving. And it doesn't mean you live in squalor or make a life defined by compromise or anything like that, but just getting those posts to stop moving. I have clients who have a ton of money and they live terrible lives, and I have clients who have much less money, and they live incredibly contented lives. And, given the choice, which one would you rather have? Most people, if they're honest, would probably want that contentment. Right?
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. All right, take us through myth number 3.
So the third myth that we see, and you can kind of let me know if this is relevant down in the U.S. or not as well, but it's this idea that in retirement, dividends are one of the best ways to create retirement income. I don't know, have you seen stuff like this?
Yeah, we have strategies all the time of like go all in on dividend
Right.
stocks so that you're just drawing from that.
Yeah. And so the interesting thing with dividend, I mean, hey, like some people, the thing with investing is there's lots of different ways to invest well. And like there's no one way. There are only a small handful of ways that you can totally screw things up. It often has to do with like debt or taking too much risk or something like that, right? So dividends like can totally form a part of it, but in retirement planning, there ends up often being like an over reliance on dividends specifically, and I think that there's a couple problems with that. Like number one, the dividends are determined by directors in boardrooms. It's like, how badly do you want your retirement income being dictated to you on the basis of a boardroom governance decision, right? Like, it's just not great. The other piece would be, like dividends. Dividends can grow. Dividends can also cut, right? So sometimes you can have a case where a really reputable name ends up having their dividends slashed, and like, how badly do you want to have your retirement income cut again because of some boardroom decision? The other piece as well is I mean, sometimes dividend folks will push for a higher yield, right? A higher dividend yield. And that can be great, but let's just remember, like, risk and return are always going to be related. So if we are earning a higher dividend yield, what that means is that whether we realize it or not, we're actually taking a little bit more risk than perhaps a company that's paying a lower dividend yield. I mean, that's imputed in the value of that dividend that they're receiving. And so sometimes this can lead to more concentrated, more actually like risky portfolios, which then perhaps in retirement is maybe not the time that you need to be taking more risk. At that point, it's probably better that you're getting more diversified, not more concentrated. And so this idea that like this is the only way to create kind of like retirement income is, a lot of experience would suggest like a more of a total return strategy can still kind of get you to the goalposts that you need to. Here's our goalposts again.
Yeah.
So a total return strategy can still kind of get you to that desired outcome that you want, and you can synthetically create the income by selling units of whatever it is that you have in there. So you can still create the income without that over reliance on kind of that dividend yield, right?
In Canada, at least, is there a tax difference between dividend income? I know at least in the U.S. we have qualified dividends, non-qualified. Is there a similar concept?
Yeah, totally. So, and it depends on the type of account that you're looking at, right? So in like a non-registered kind of like brokerage account, certainly if you're receiving dividend income, there's preferential tax treatment that you would earn on that dividend. But the thing is in retirement, we have in Canada other sources of pension income that are going to be income tested. And if you are receiving dividend income inside that account, that income gets grossed up and actually can claw back some other income tested government benefits that you otherwise might qualify for if you had adopted a different investment strategy. So this is like the knock-on effects of where like your income plan, if it's not integrated and synchronized with your investment plan, it can work totally fine as when you're in that accumulation stage. But once you get into the decumulation stage, like you really need like your income plan and your investment plan and your tax plan to kind of start working together in a more harmonious way to avoid some of these unintended consequences.
I love that. I know that at least on our end, we have what's the Social Security side of things, which would be kind of like a retirement benefit there. But we always talk about like building your base off of that, and then there are decisions that are going to impact that and the tax consequences of all of these things coming in here. So I think I
think it catches a lot of people off guard.
Yeah.
And again, it's not necessarily that it's wrong. It's just that they don't know the consequences of these decisions on other parts of their plan.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Take us through myth number 4.
Okay, so the fourth misconception just has to do with this idea like, I'll figure out taxes later. So I don't know, again, in the U.S. how this works for you guys, but in Canada, so we have like, I guess our 401k equivalent would be like an RRSP, a registered retirement savings plan, or a RIF, which is like the income version of that. And what we find many is like a lot of people are retiring early these days, right? So like 58, 60, not 65. And so they often have this gap where they have to self-fund a lot of their retirement off of their own kind of personal savings, right? And so sometimes what folks will do is, they're just going to live on perhaps after-tax cash, right? Like brokerage account, open account savings for a period of time. And without even realizing it, they keep their marginal tax rate super low for a prolonged period of time, only to realize later on when they start taking money out of their RIF account, all of a sudden they got these minimum payments that are going to balloon up their marginal tax rate super, super high. And by that point, it's just too late, right? Like you needed to solve this problem like in your early 60s, not in your 70s, right? And you can't get that lost time back. You can't go unwind any of this stuff. And so when people make this transition into retirement, they really can't wait to figure out that tax plan. There's a lot of proactive things that you can do while your income is still kind of in, I call it like that tax planning valley, right? Like your income, maybe you're not working anymore and you now get to decide what shows up on your tax return for the first time in your life. And it's not a passive exercise. You need to be active in it, right? And there's lots of options, and there's probably optimal ways to do it and suboptimal ways to do it, maybe like wrong ways to do it, right? But for the average person who's not getting help figuring out like what is the right way, should I take money from this account? In our case, like an open account or a brokerage account. Should I take money from my RRSP for 1K equivalent? Should I take it from my TFSA or I guess that'd be a Roth equivalent, right? Like you have all these different buckets, and a decision today is probably going to have an impact on the type of decision that you'll have available to you later on, right? Because sometimes if you delay this stuff, you narrow the range of choices that you might have later on in life. Is that something you find?
Yeah, we talk about like degrees of freedom, right? Like how many degrees of freedom do you have based off of your choices that you have? And it sounds like, at least on our end, we have something called a Roth conversion, right? So they're moving from a traditional account that has required minimum distributions, moving that over into a Roth to fill in certain marginal tax brackets where that's advantageous. It sounds like there's kind of a similar concept that could happen up there.
Yeah, totally. And so sometimes if you're in that like early retiree camp, let's say you retire at 58 and you need to create 7 years of extra income, you get to decide which bucket you want to take it from. And you might actually, there might be a scenario here where maybe you need X dollars to live on, but you might actually choose to trigger up a little bit of extra income because you can take it out and tax shelter it over here into some other tax advantaged account where it's not like a red light in terms of its tax treatment, right? Maybe you can get some red light dollars and put it into a green light bucket, right? And so again, the only way that you can make those decisions is in the presence of a broader perspective. If you're always making it you're evaluating your success of a tax strategy on the annual results, often you're going to be not seeing the forest for the trees, right? Like you're going to be you might pay really, really low tax this year, but it's coming at the cost of a really big lifetime tax bill, maybe even an estate tax bill or something along those lines. And that's just something that most folks aren't thinking about at all when they're figuring out how to construct their retirement income stream.
And I think what I'm hearing here is that required minimum distributions, if it's at 72, I'm not sure the age there, but
they're both in Canada. Yeah,
you're saying like, okay, if you're 71 years old, you're kind of behind the 8 ball at this point. Like it's too late to really do a lot to help you here.
Range of outcomes super narrow now. What levers can you pull? I mean, you've pretty much got everything on full horsepower at that point. Kind of is what it is. Like we call them ticking tax bombs, right? And I'm sure in the U.S. it's probably something similar with its own little degrees of nuance.
We call it tax torpedo.
Oh, that one, bombs, torpedoes, pick your weaponry, right? So totally. So for someone who's like successful and they've been able to squirrel away a good bit of money, we have one client, they go into retirement with $2 million in pre-tax money, right, across these different types of accounts. Money that they've never paid tax on, that their job is now over the next 20 years to like get this out in as efficient a way as possible. And it's just not something where you're rewarded for procrastination.
No, that's great. That's awesome. I think the tax situation is huge for no matter where you live. And it's definitely a big thing here for sure, is planning around those tax situations. Take us through, what is myth number 5?
Okay, so the fifth myth, and which is perhaps a little bit spicier and maybe more up your line, is just that like healthcare is covered. Like I don't really need to think about it. Which,
Oh, yeah.
like preaching to the choir here, right?
This is the whole channel here.
Yeah, exactly. So in Canada, it is a little bit. I mean, we can sleep at night maybe a little bit easier. With regards to this, of course, you might be sleeping in the ER waiting to actually see a doctor, but we won't get into that. So what we've found is the biggest exposure with our clients is has to do with like long-term care. So I just had a client this last week move into some type of like assisted living arrangement. Personal care needs required that. Sold the home, and those costs are going to be about $10,000 a month for her. In Canada, there's a public funded option for assisted living, and then there's a private funded option. And sometimes you might have one single facility that has beds or rooms available on both of those platforms. And so in this case, the one partner needed a private pay option that was going to cost her $10,000 a month. Her husband, there wasn't a private pay option for the type of care that he needed. It was complex care. That was going to cost him 90% of his personal net income. So it's income tested.
Wow.
And so on the one side, the one spouse has to pay out a significant enough amount of money out of their savings. That income hits the tax return, which then punitively drives up even the public funded costs on his care costs. And so it's just not something that you can kind of put your head in the sand and hope it all kind of works itself out. In Canada, at least, there's like we don't have to pay for a visit to the doctor or something like that. We pay just a forsaken amount of personal tax. I mean, where I'm from in British Columbia, the highest personal tax rate is 53.5% combined provincial plus federal. But the thing is that kicks in at around $250,000. So I think in the U.S. you might eventually get up to that, combined tax rate in some states, but it's going to be a way higher income threshold. But then, of course, you guys got to deal with all the extra care costs, as in terms of out-of-pocket premiums, and it leads to fantastic channels like this. So
exactly. So is our long-term care cost is an advantage or an opportunity there? We have long-term care insurance plans that will kind of help with that in that event of private pay versions. Is there a similar concept, or is it
There is.
different?
They haven't really gained traction like you perhaps would have otherwise expected. There was a bit of a renaissance of those types of policies a decade or so ago, but perhaps maybe the size of the market or the fact that we have these other public funded options. They're just a lot of those carriers that were offering those types of policies just didn't hack it and often launch the contracts and shut them down, that type of thing. So we don't see as much of that. To saving the bacon of the average Canadian aging retiree, though, is a tremendous wealth effect that came from the value of their home, right? So the average, boomer edging into a silent generation has a lottery ticket in the value of their home on average, right? Vancouver is some of the richest real estate market in the entire world for a variety of reasons, which we're not going to get into here, but generally, for the average person, they're selling their home when they're doing a downsize. Maybe they move into like a life lease as a part of a transition plan, and then eventually they move off of that into actual like public or private funded care where they're needing that. And generally, I mean, you're not staying in a living arrangement like that for 15 years. It's going to be at the tail end of your life experience, and so. That is kind of the saving grace, and perhaps why these insurance policies haven't been able to hack it. But regardless, there are just costs that come that are unexpected, and I think the average person just doesn't have any idea, because often you don't figure it out until you need to figure it out, and often then maybe your kids are helping you figure it out. And so there is certainly value in when you're kind of like building a financial plan, building like a retirement income plan, making sure that you're accounting for a little kind of hockey stick of costs, nice hockey Canadian metaphor, of costs at the very end. Certainly, if you're building a plan, you're going to want to see, if you're not doing that, build some surplus or float in terms of like other assets that you can be tapping to kind of bridge the gap through that final kind of uptick of spending.
Yeah, that's super interesting. That's again, this is kind of my wheelhouse here. So from at least our perspective, we are paying for Medicare, we are paying for healthcare coverage. And what I think a lot of people fail to realize is that at least on the Medicare side of things, Medicare does not touch long-term care. So going into your facilities like you explained in your example there, Medicare is not paying any of that. And so then they are left to either sell their home. You talked about, I think it was like a life lease. I think reverse mortgage is kind of what I'm thinking that is. I don't know if it's the same terminology or not.
A life lease is going to be some type of like society-led housing initiative.
Okay.
And so you're going to be, committing to a space in a common facility, a condo tower or something like that. You'll put in $300,000, and a life lease just says, hey, when you move on from this place, you're going to get your money back.
Okay.
You're not going to get the appreciation on that back. The life lease society essentially takes that money, invests the proceeds. The proceeds, I guess the investment income off of that capital is what funds the place. So it ends up being a good option for people who have perhaps a little bit smaller asset base or don't have the income required to kind of give them housing stability.
Yeah.
And co-op housing, like that type of arrangement. A lot of this stuff was created in the 70s and 80s, and we're still now experiencing the benefits of those good decisions back then. A lot of the stuff hasn't been built up in the last 20 or 30 years, right? So
yeah, and your healthcare costs too. I just made a video on this around, there's kind of 3 buckets of people that we tend to see. And bucket number 1 is they're healthy their entire lives and they die in their sleep and they never had a healthcare cost their entire life.
Yeah.
Let's all hope that that's us.
Yeah.
Or they have like a pretty sharp spike in healthcare costs because they go to the ER and they die in the hospital type of a thing, but relatively low costs. Bucket number 2 is they have chronic conditions and they've had high costs their entire life before they retire, when they retire. I think diabetes, other things happening there. And then the third bucket is the hardest one to predict of they have some good years, they have some moderate years, and they have some very high cost years. And so dealing with that is kind of tough. And then the long-term care costs, it seems like it's a very short amount of time or like a 5-year amount of time, right? So we have Alzheimer's, dementia, those are longer term things.
Absolutely. And you're seeing a lot of the build out in Canada of like specific villages of care or care complexes designed around the needs of those specific communities, which is great. But you're right. I mean, people can live in that state for a very, very, very long time. We have one client who's lived in something like that for 10 years, and that have never been expected. And so, when you're building that plan, just stress testing it for these types of circumstances, it doesn't mean that I mean, there's no quick fix to any of this stuff, but it might help inform the type of housing decisions. You say, okay, if we're making a move into a specific type of assisted living arrangement, like if this ends up being like, can we sustain this for 5 years? If that's our circumstance, if this goes 10 years, are we going to be forced to move out of this nicer standard of care if all of a sudden the costs just get out of hand, right? Yeah. So stress testing that out beforehand certainly can help shape better decisions before, because it's just a lot of disruption to make these moves later on.
That's beautiful. Thanks for elaborating on that, because that's kind of my little passion area. So thanks. All right, what's myth number 6?
So myth number 6 is just that in retirement, it means that I'm going to like completely stop working. Like it's going to be like a binary, like black and white type thing. And more and more, I mean, this one's changed a lot in the last 10 or 15 years. More and more people are not doing that. Like they're either having an encore career that's completely different than what they were doing before, or maybe career adjacent, right? So maybe they were like running a school district and now they're doing consulting work, or they're running a nonprofit charity and now they're going to go drive a school bus or something like that, like just something completely different. Sometimes it comes, this like career 2.0 might take the shape of like really intentional volunteering. And a lot of people just have no clue. They just don't know. And so we're seeing a lot more like folks retiring early, 58, 60, something like that. And then what we love is like when we're building a plan, trying to figure out, is there a way that we can fund like a mini retirement? Like if you're not 100% sure, but you can't keep doing what you're doing, like let's fund a 18-month period here where you're just going to have full permission to do something completely different without any financial strain at all. We'll fund that, right? And maybe you're going to go do a pile of travel, or going to go just do something just completely off of your regular routine. And it just kind of gives you that reset. And we're seeing that a lot more. And then at that point in time, you can decide, do you want to go back into some type of, renaissance of your own kind of personal creation, or are you actually done? And you're kind of creating space to create a good decision there. And again, it has financial implications. You have to fund this stuff, right? And so, just seeing a lot more of that. And often it's trying to find things that kind of that they're not going to be harmful financially, but they're going to scratch some type of passion project, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe a creative outlet or a social outlet, or sometimes people will, especially like highly capable professionals or executives or something, like they want to do something like cognitively intriguing to them. Like they want to keep their brain active, right? And a lot of good research on why they would want to do that. And so they'll try to find something to kind of dig into. And sometimes that is like, I'm going to work on a board of a nonprofit. I'm just going to invest in this as though I'm thinking about it as though I'm owning it, right? Like take an ownership mentality to it. And so seeing a lot more of that, whereas I think a lot of people would benefit from taking that type of like open-handed approach, because if you just think about it as a binary, like when I'm done, I'm out, a lot of people can feel pretty anxious about that.
Yeah.
Did you ever see the video as a TEDx talk by a guy named Riley Moynes? So he wrote a book called The 4 Phases or Stages, I think Phases of Retirement. And he kind of goes through, kind of breaks out, like there's like the honeymoon phase, like the mourning phase, like this process of self-discovery as you go through retirement. Put a link to that video up here.
Yeah, I will. That's perfect.
And so essentially, if you can like anticipate that there are these stages, and perhaps you can like circuit interrupt some of those stages so that you can kind of anticipate the feelings that you'll feel ahead of actually feeling those feelings, you can end up making better decisions and just more purposeful kind of uses of your time and your energy as you transition through those phases.
It's so funny when you talk about kind of the retirement side of things too. Of one that has come up a lot in the people that I interact with is they've retired and then they get bored, or they're like, my wife just doesn't want me around the house this much, so I got to go find some. I can only golf so much.
He fills the dishwasher wrong.
Yeah, and so we got to go find something else. But with the advancements of technologies and stuff, we have a follower and friend of the channel, Buzz's Retirement Garage, who started a YouTube channel, and now he's doing great on that. And he just shares his life as a retiree. And I think to your point, like now in my mental state, if you said, hey, you have 18 months to go build a YouTube channel about your passion project, I think I could monetize that in 18 months. And so for retirees, there are all these avenues now of, you can kind of fund retirement in a little bit different way with your time.
Yeah, I mean, there's some people dive headfirst into retirement. They're like, I can't get there soon enough, right? Yeah. Other people, there's like that hesitation. Typically the hesitation, if the finances are in good order, it's more a matter of like, what am I going to do with my time?
Yeah.
Like my life has been so busy. I have no control over my time. And now I have the opposite of that. Like what on earth am I going to do? And so thinking through and kind of creating space and opportunity for this type of like creative life design process, without getting too fruity about it, but like, smart people can come up with really interesting things that they're buried deep in the back of their mind. These like things that they never gave themselves permission to actually go and do. And perhaps now this might be the time in our life where we can go do those things.
I love that. All right. What's the next retirement myth?
So the 7th myth has to do with inheritance. Warren Buffett actually wrote this really fascinating letter recently where back in November of last year, where he kind of specified what his own kind of estate plans were. It was a shareholder letter to Berkshire shareholders, and for him, it was kind of wild because he decided that he was going to leave each of his kids about $10 million. And for him, he looked at that number. I mean, his wealth at the time was like $160 billion. I don't know what it is today. This was like a rounding error. A penny in front of a steamroller. Like it didn't even make sense relative to his total net worth. And for him, that was enough. And so I think there's actually a lot of wisdom in that, right? A lot of folks that we see, their retirement plan projection will look good, like a chart that slopes up and to the right, right? Like there's enough money here. And then they look at that, they're like, okay, it's encouraging, but then like, well, I don't know if I want to leave my kids that though. Right. And I think like that's what kind of Buffett is kind of scratching onto here. There's this the opposite side of this is this idea popularized by that die with zero concept. Yeah. Right. And I think more and more folks are kind of coming to terms with that line of thinking. If you kind of think about your like life through the lens of money, right? Like when you're young, you're trying to figure out like how to convert your skills into income. Right. And then you figure that out. You like earn a good income. Now the game is like, how do I convert my income into things on my balance sheet, like in net worth, right? Like assets. And then you figure that out, right? It just takes time, like 10 years. And then the next phase that no one really tells you about is, well, how do I now convert my assets or my balance sheet into things that actually give me nostalgia?
Yeah.
Things that give me good memories, good vibes when I think about them. And the crazy thing with memories is that they appreciate over time. So you think about like, you guys did a trip recently, right?
Yep.
You probably spent some money on that trip to make it happen as a gift to your family. But like I would venture a guess that the value of that trip will feel way, way greater in your mind 30 years from now when you go back and watch the videos of you guys on that massive adventure.
Even like it's been a few months, right? And even like today, I'm like, man, that was so cool, right?
You just feel it,
and
right?
it just keeps going.
Yeah.
The longer that goes.
I asked one of my clients what their favorite or most memorable Christmas gift was that they've ever received in their life. This person was 85. We were reflecting on their journey through life. They told me it was a mandarin orange when they were 8. They said nothing else has ever compared to the feeling of them receiving that mandarin orange. It's like, it's an orange. It's like we take this stuff for granted. Like you buy a box of them for $5, right?
Yeah.
Like, but for them, like that was that produced so much nostalgia, the memory, the taste. The whole family shared this orange. Like they had 2 slices of like an 8-sliced mandarin orange, right?
Wow.
And that was the thing that carried with them. And so as you're thinking about like, retirement, use of your money, like the goal should be, okay, now how do we squeeze all the juice out of our money, right? How do we convert these dollars into things that are going to give our family meaning and purpose and memory? Because at the end of the day, those are going to be the things that you're really going to want to carry with you. And I think you're going to find a lot more satisfaction if you get to the end of your time and you're not left with a massive pile of wealth kind of sprayed all over the place, but you've done a really good and intentional job of creating a legacy for your family by way of converting these dollars into memories and things that give you that feeling of nostalgia.
I love that. I feel like there is a little bit of a friction there in just that they've accumulated their whole life, and then to tell somebody to spend money now.
Yeah, and the average retiree still saves in retirement.
Yeah,
like it's crazy. It's like this psychology of converting and switching from accumulation to decumulation is like so hard.
Yeah, because you've had 65 take your working years, so you've got 45, call it 50 years of I have to save and accumulate.
It's just flipping hard.
Yeah,
right. And I can't blame them. Yeah. So part of a role of someone who's helping someone make good money decisions is actually looking at this saying, hey, the math is good. Like there's no math problem here. Like your job is to come back to me in 6 months and tell me how you're going to spend. I'm going to give you a permission-free amount of money. And if you don't come back to me and tell me a plan of how you're going to spend that, like we'll create some like penalty or like punishment or something that's like I'll impose on you, kind of like a weight trainer imposes pain and suffering on their victims, right? So if you kind of create some like peer pressure, some accountability to actually make that happen, again, once the base is set, like you don't do this if you don't have a solid base, but once you do have a good base, then the challenge is like, okay, let's convert this into stuff that's actually going to matter. Right?
Yeah, that's beautiful. Love it. Let's go myth number 8, I believe we are on.
Okay, so myth number 8 is this just idea that a financial plan is like a one-time event, right? So, and maybe this happens down here too, where a client will walk into our office. They say, okay, I've already got a financial plan here, but like something doesn't feel quite right with it. Like it doesn't feel like robust or whatever. We look at it, and essentially it was this thing that was dumped into a computer. They printed out a report and it's like, here you go, right? And like it has like no life in it. It wasn't matched with their goals or their values, or doesn't have that retirement spending smile concept that we talked about, or the kicker of healthcare costs at the very end. Doesn't have any of that stuff. And so I guess the person thinks like, okay, I got a plan, like I'm good, right? Like the numbers say they're all green, so perfect. But the reality is that the plan is good, and that's fine. But it's the process of planning that's actually more valuable than anything, right? If you can produce a plan in 10 minutes, maybe even AI can help you do that these days. And maybe that's better than nothing. But the better process to go through is actually a really thoughtful and deliberate exercise that's going to say, like, what are the goals that we want? What are the actual assumptions that we want to have underpin all of this stuff? What are all the 5 different ways that we think that this might actually change in the future? Like, I have no idea what future me wants. Just like I past me had no idea that I would be here today, right? So a proper kind of financial plan is more of like a living, breathing document. You don't really want to see this thing as something that you have to defend and that you hope it's going to be accurate and a map for the next 30 years of your life. It's not. Like, the only thing we know right now is that it's going to be wrong tomorrow. We just don't know how.
Yeah.
So the point of this planning process is essentially just to try to be, like Carl Richards says, like, you just want to be a little bit less wrong tomorrow, right? The point of planning isn't to be perfect. We are aiming for perfection. We just know that we're not going to get there. So the point of the process is just to try to be a little bit, like, incrementally less wrong. And so as life changes, as your goals change, you get married, you get divorced, you have new grandkids, inflation runs hot, inflation runs cold, markets go up 10%, markets go down, whatever the thing is, the plan needs to kind of ebb and flow with all of that. And so it ends up being this kind of living, breathing thing. And ideally, it becomes something that you update on an annual basis. Like with U.S. medical decisions, like, there's an element here where you kind of you make a decision, but then you also need to, like, course correct and adjust perhaps over time as life evolves too. So I think it's probably the same is true in your space, right?
Yeah, we have, again, on the Medicare side specifically, generally there are 2 routes people can take. There's a supplement plan, there's an Advantage plan. They all have pros and cons. People get very passionate about them, but an Advantage plan renews every year. So every year, You're going to shop that around, see if there are other options or if your current one is working for you. Same thing with drug plans. And then the supplement plan is a little bit more, in most states, you've kind of picked your decision and you can't jump around different supplement plans. You can always go back to an Advantage plan, but go to an Advantage plan to a supplement plan isn't as easy. So I think we talked earlier about kind of your degrees of freedom as you're coming up on these decisions is what changes can happen, and then how able are you to make those changes relatively quickly within a certain amount of time. And so I think with these financial plans, I think of my parents who ended up getting divorced. So that kind of threw a wrench in certain plans, but also they had kids of theirs get divorced. And so their plans for their inheritance for their kids and their wills and trusts and estates and everything also shifted. And so it's like, it's not a one-time thing that's going on here.
No, it's iterative, and there are these, like, trigger moments where it just, like, forces, like, a hard reevaluation of, like, all of those assumptions, right? And so, like, as you're coming into that retirement risk zone, right? Like the 5 years before retirement, retirement, the 5 years after, like, that's where there's, like, the most at stake. Typically, your balance sheet, your net worth is the highest in that period of time. And so it's perhaps going to be the case where, like, as your goals change, even in that window of time, maybe you're updating the plan every 2 years or something like that. And certainly, every 6 months in between, then you're, like, making sure that you're on track, like looking at the spending, seeing how, judging for evaluating and protecting yourself against sequence of return risk, all that type of stuff. And so, super, super important that you kind of see this concept of planning more as a verb than a noun, right? Like this, we're talking about the process of planning, not the plan itself, right?
Awesome. Take us through myth number 9.
Okay, so myth number 9 has to do with, like, the timing of retirement itself. Up in Canada, our pension program is called the Canada Pension Plan, CPP we call it. And it was created back in the 1960s at the age of 65. There was no choice about, like, when you could take it, right? You couldn't take it earlier, you couldn't take it later. And the fascinating thing, this was a contributory pension plan. So you put money into it, and then at 65, you could get money back. And the goal was to supplement about 25% of your retirement income from this kind of this Canada pension plan. The irony was at that time, the life expectancy for the average Canadian was 71. So you put money in, you took it at 65, you live 6 years, you kick the bucket. Today, life expectancy is like mid 80s, and within a couple, again, like I said, like, you've got a 25% chance that one of you is going to be living to 95, which is, like, those are not terrible odds. Like, those are odds that you have to plan for. And so, this, like, 65 as a retirement target is a bit of like a social anchor that people kind of tend to come to, but very rarely, like, do I actually have a client that is retiring at 65? Like more often than not, they're retiring early. The question is, are they retiring on their own terms or not?
Yeah.
Most people, like say that again, they're 58. Maybe they want to retire at 63. And more often than not, if they're retiring early, it's actually not because they chose it. They're retiring early because of some health thing that came up, or health thing of someone in their family related to them, or some type of like corporate restructuring or something outside of their control. It was not their own personal choice. So when you're building a plan, again, this is helpful information to be taking into consideration. Number one, the odds of you living longer are way higher than they were 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And so you just have this longevity piece that you got to figure out. It's one thing to fund a 6-year retirement. It's something else entirely to fund a retirement for 30 years, right? It's just unprecedented. Retirement in itself is like a modern construct. Like no one was doing this stuff 200 years ago because you had to work on the field just to survive. And so longevity is one piece, but the other piece is just this uncertainty about when is your time actually going to come. And you should assume that it will become sooner and not because you chose that. Yeah. Like that's what the data would suggest is a helpful way to frame this thinking in your mind. And then
that's your retirement time, not your death. Or are you talking about your death?
Yeah, no, retirement time.
Okay, perfect.
Assume that the retirement time is going to come sooner than you thought.
Yeah.
And it might not be on your own terms.
Yeah.
And so again, when you're building a plan, it should be stress testing that actually occurring. Like, hey, here's my default, but let's see what happens if this were to happen. How would I arrange my choices that I might have in terms of income, cash flow, tax, all that type of stuff, if this happens to come at me a little bit sooner than I was thinking.
Yeah, that's interesting because in 1965, Medicare was set up. The full retirement age was 65. Social Security, which I think is the equivalent to your pension plan, that's upped their full retirement age to now it's 67 for people that are retiring, or kind of that age bracket depending on your birthday. But yeah, everyone kind of does anchor to that 65 because that is the number for Medicare. Social Security, it's creeping up a little bit to help us.
Right. So in Canada, you can take CPP now early if you want at age 60. Of course, those benefits are going to be reduced down. If you choose to delay, you'll get an extra like 0.7% plus an inflation adjustment all the way up to age 70. We have another kind of like Social Security equivalent program in Canada called OAS, Old Age Security, and it's income tested. And that one you can take between 65 and 70. Also has another gross up if you delay that one as well. And so all of these, like the water cooler advice of like, here's what you should do, like that might have been applicable 20 or 30 years ago. It just is not applicable today with the lifespans and longevity that we're seeing, right? Like these are massive liabilities that are going to potentially be with us for a very long period of time. Of course, everyone remembers the people who passed too early, but they don't remember the people who lived too long.
Right.
Like we always remember the story of our loved ones who passed sooner than we would have hoped. And then we think, oh, that'll be me. But like you should be asking the question, what happens if it's not? What happens if I take the other side of that average? And then how am I going to be, prepared and kind of buttressed in case that might happen?
Yeah, the absolutes are just very clickbaity in terms of the title. Like always take it at 62 or always take it at wait until 70. So it's that they always.
And at the end of the day, you just got to test this stuff, right? Like, and for some people, actually, the choice here, it doesn't actually lead to a wide range of outcomes. And maybe it is just a decision. Like maybe it just doesn't mathematically matter that much because of whatever other factors that might affect their life. But in other cases, like we're talking about like 6-figure decisions. Like maybe this single decision might affect them by their age 90 to the tune of like $300,000. Like very, very common to see that happen.
Yeah.
And I don't think many people expect that.
Right. No, that's great. I think we are to myth number 10.
There we go. Okay, so myth number 10 has to do with this idea of like if I just like invest better, I'll be fine, right?
Yeah.
And so this is like again like a carry forward of that accumulator mindset, right? So again, for like 30, maybe 40 years, you've like converted your brain into income, your income into savings, and that has served you well, right? Like you now have a bucket of money that's there to fund you. What a lot of people do is they'll continue to take that exact same mindset all the way through their decumulation years. And it either leads to more risk than they need, which can lead to catastrophic, like really, really bad, nasty things. Or it can lead to anxiety and them worrying about things that they just don't really need to be worrying about in this season of their life, right? again, there's this great quote that says, like, concentration builds wealth, diversification preserves it. And I think when people are switching over to retirement kind of decumulation, they sign up for, they bring their same mindset, their same kind of approach to how we're going to play the game of finance all the way through this next season of life. And it while it worked well for them in those accumulation years, it no longer is serving them.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, it's holding them back. It's causing them friction, frustration, anxiety, worry in their life when they really don't need to be taking on those burdens.
Yeah.
Right. And so what ends up happening is obviously there's a whole lot of things here that are going to matter a whole lot more than actually like chasing performance, right? Like focusing on how much risk you're taking, focusing on your like withdrawal strategy, on your tax plan. Like all of these things are completely in your control. They can have in retirement, like how you pull those levers, massive like 6-figure improvements to your outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And those are all way better things to focus on as you're thinking about decumulation. Again, it's not that you can't do this stuff when you're in that accumulation phase, but certainly when you're in the decumulation phase, there exists a whole pile of other like tools in the tool belt, levers to pull that can improve your outcomes in a way that preserves your sanity. It doesn't mean you're leaving money on the table or being foolish with your stewardship of your wealth. But it's just going to free up a lot of mental energy that otherwise would be allocated to typically chasing pretty unhelpful attributes.
Yeah. And part of this, I think, is not doing anything stupid. And the reason I say that is that when we talk about this game of money and investing, I need to invest better. I think a lot of people think this could just be a skill and I can time things right. So when things go up quickly or down quickly, like kind of what we're living through right now, it's not necessarily a skill thing there. And we talked a little bit offline. We both enjoy golf. And sorry for those who don't golf, but I can't tell you how many times like I will go golf and I'll feel something. I'll go to a YouTube video that will say, you just need to fix this one little thing and that'll straighten out your swing. Well, me fixing this one little thing caused severe problems in my swing. And so I think making reactionary decisions with your portfolio in the idea that I can play the game better can actually be as bad of a consequence as any decision you make.
I mean, at this point, like you should just be honest with yourself. You say, hey, like I arrived. Like if you did a plan, you ran it, the numbers look good, like big green check mark. Now you're at the like optimization stage of building a plan. Like you won. Like that's great. The goal should be like preservation. Like how do we get ourselves through this in as a meaningful a way as possible, still being a good steward of what we have. Like you earned it once. Don't go earn it a second time, right? Like you don't need to swing for the fence anymore. I have a client who's just on the cusp of retirement. We built a plan for them. They own a couple properties, a bunch of businesses, and have maybe $2 million of savings. And we review all their stuff as a part of building out the plan. And they said, "Oh yeah, no, we're good. You don't need to like we just need like the decumulation strategy. Tell me what to sell in what order, like properties, assets, like that type of thing." And we looked at the investment account. Again, about $2 million in this was concentrated in 2 Canadian companies. When we film this here, markets are going through a little bit of a little hiccup. They're moving around a lot these days. And one of those 2 companies was down 25% in a single day.
Wow.
So that all that really good planning work all of a sudden goes completely out the window when you adopt a really silly, perhaps greedy or accumulator mindset based strategy that says, okay, like concentration is the way that we build wealth. And again, to his credit, that is how he built his wealth. But as they're now thinking about the switch to the other side of retirement, of decumulation, like what worked well for them in the past doesn't mean that it was wrong, but it might not serve them as well in the future as they think about that switch to decumulation.
Yeah. This has been an awesome conversation. Thank you for taking the time as you're coming through town to sit down and chat with me. We save this to the end because we've never been a salesy presentation, but for people watching and they say, you know what, I kind of like how he views the world, who can you help and what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so we help primarily Canadians help figure out how to construct their income streams really well, build good tax plans, run good investment strategy, and ultimately see this stuff kind of come together. So we primarily help Canadian folks answer those questions right as they're on the door of that really significant transition. And so that's the type of people that we're working with.
perfect. And then you've got a YouTube channel, so you're a fellow YouTuber.
At Willems Wealth, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it turns out, I mean, Canadians have the exact same questions that a lot of our American friends have as well. And it's a common experience across the border. And up in Canada, there's just a lot of folks with questions. They don't know where to get those answers. And so we're trying to help give away as much help as we can.
Yeah, well, and if anyone watching this, go subscribe to that channel as well. If you've got Canadian friends, then send them there as well. And again, thank you for taking this time.
Super deluxe.
Okay.